Well, hi there. This is an insect. And insects are, at least in terms of identified species, the single most successful group of animals on the planet. There are more described species of beetles, just beetles, than there are plants. You have probably heard that we're living in the age of mammals. Well, not only are there more species of extant dinosaurs than there are mammals, but there are more species of cockroaches, just cockroaches, than mammals. And cockroaches are barely in the top 10 for the most speciose groups of insects. It is estimated that for every human walking around on this planet right now, there are well over 2 million ants. There are twice as many species of flies as there are vertebrates. All vertebrates. And they're only the third most speciose group of insects. Insects are what you might call insanely successful. And all of this despite the fact that they are almost completely absent from the Earth's oceans. And the fact that their blood doesn't transport oxygen. And they're tiny and physiologically cannot get very large. I mean, even the largest insect of all time, the giant griffin fly, Meganeuropsis, had a wingspan well under a meter at just 28 inches and was only about 17 inches long. That's big for an insect, but it's pretty small compared to truly giant animals like, well, mallard ducks, for example. I guess what I'm saying is that this is never going to happen.
Get the antennae! Get the antennae! Get the other antenna! Get the other antenna! He's helpless without them!
Now, I recognize that these ants were irradiated by numerous nuclear tests, but the fact is that genetic variation is not the reason that insects stay small. This might be the most diverse group of animals on the planet. And I'm not saying this to make fun of this scene. It's one of my favorite scenes in all of cinematic history, for reasons I'll discuss later. But because insects have some serious constraints on size that you might not know about. I'd say that if you know one constraint, it's probably their skeleton. Not that they have one. The largest animals ever to walk on land had skeletons. It is where the skeleton is located.
On the outside.
Let's look at a box. A box that is 1 by 1 by 1 box units has a volume of 1 cubic box unit. To calculate its surface area, we need to take the area of each side, which in this case is 1 times 1, or 1 square box unit, and then multiply that by the number of sides, 6. Thus, this box has a surface area to volume ratio of 6 to 1. But if I scale the box up to 2 by 2 by 2, I now get a volume of 8 cubic box units, and a surface area of 4 times 6, or 24. Thus, the surface area to volume ratio is 24 to 8, or 3 to 1. If I scale it up to 3 by 3 by 3, the surface area to volume ratio is 54 to 27, or just 2 to 1. And if it's 10 by 10 by 10, then it's 600 to 1,000, or just 0.6 to 1. The larger the box, the smaller the surface area to volume ratio becomes, because surface area grows at a square rate and volume at a cubic rate. This isn't a big deal for a box that lives in the ocean, but on land, volume really matters because buoyancy doesn't help to counteract gravity, and weight is largely tied to volume. Meanwhile, the size of your exoskeleton is largely tied to surface area. What I'm saying is that an exoskeleton doesn't grow larger at a rate that counteracts the rate at which an irradiated ant would get heavier. So this explains why insects don't get as big as cars. But there are plenty of other terrestrial crustaceans, and yes, I'm saying that insects are crustaceans, that get much larger than the largest insect ever known to have existed. Like these coconut crabs that we found in Niue. And why were they able to get bigger in the past than they are now? The answers to those questions probably come down to the way that they breathe. They breathe funny. Of course, they're doing much better than our vertebrates, so maybe we're the ones that breathe funny. But as I said earlier, they don't transport oxygen with their blood. In fact, it can be argued that the fluid that insects pump around their bodies shouldn't even be considered blood. It's generally called hemolymph instead of blood. But their cells still need oxygen. So how do they get it? Direct delivery via pipes called a tracheal system. And this works just great if you're small. But the larger they get, the longer these thin pipes need to be. And you can try this experiment sometime, but it is possible to breathe through a thin straw. But the longer the straw, the harder it gets to be. And given that the intakes are on the surface of the insect, you are again running into that surface area to volume ratio problem. So this probably explains why insects are the size that they are. But why did some get much larger in the past? Well, it may interest you to know that the largest insects in history also existed at the time when atmospheric oxygen levels were the highest that they've ever been. And to answer your question, no, insects would not get noticeably larger if you raised them in a high oxygen environment. But if you keep oxygen levels high for thousands of generations and select for large body size, I would wager good money that you could produce some insects that are larger than any currently living on Earth. But there are still some big and absolutely crazy insects. I mean, almost half of all eukaryotic species are insects. And today I want to blast through the nearly 30 orders of insects so that you have a big picture idea of how much crazy diversity there really is and how it's all related. Insects are, as previously mentioned, crustaceans. They are arthropods in the clade Pancrustacea, nested within the pancrustacean clade Hexapoda, the six-legged crustaceans. And insects do have 6 legs, all 6 originating from the middle of 3 body segments called the thorax. Even in beetles, where sometimes it really doesn't look like this is the case. But legs are far from their only appendages. They have 2, but not more than 2, antennae on their heads. And some would say that they're helpless without them. And fair enough, the bristles on those antennae allow them to feel things tactily, but they also use them to smell, detect temperature, humidity, atmospheric pressure, and in some cases, even sound. In other words, insects use their antennae for every sense that they have except sight and sometimes hearing. Sight is accomplished thanks to a pair of compound eyes, each composed of as many as 30,000 individual ommatidia, as well as 2 or 3 ocelli. In addition to the legs, most insects also have 2 pairs of wings that originate from the last 2 segments of the thorax. Moving back to the head, you find the mouth parts. What differentiates insects from other hexapods is that the mouth parts are located outside of the head capsule. It might seem like a small difference, but apparently it has made a big difference. Insects rule the world, you know. And they can have a pretty wild diversity of mouth parts, allowing them to feed on a broad diversity of foods and rule the world. The third body region, called the abdomen, often lacks appendages and is usually not as hard as the other 2 as it's less sclerotized than the head and thorax. But it contains many important organs, such as the respiratory, digestive, and reproductive organs. So it's still kind of a big deal. The order most distantly related to all other extant insects, the hagfish of insects if you will, is the order Archaeognatha, the slightly over 500 species of humpback and jumping bristletails. Bristletails due to the 3 appendages protruding from the back of their abdomens, 2 circi flanking the noticeably larger appendix dorsalis. In general, these are pretty unique looking insects. Really, the only thing you would confuse them with would be members of the order Zygentoma, the silverfish and firebrats, of which there are also just over 500 species. And while these are among the closest relatives of the bristletails, the members of the Zygentoma are more closely related to all other extant insects than they are to the bristletails. But they do look very similar to one another. And given that these are the 2 most basal members of the insecta, this probably gives us some window into what the common ancestors of all insects looked like. That said, it is easy to distinguish between the 2 if you get a good look at them. or if it suddenly launches itself into the air. Both lack wings, but bristletails can use their tails to throw themselves great distances. They also tend to be laterally flattened, like a sunfish, and not dorsoventrally flattened, like a stingray or a silverfish, with a somewhat humped appearance. And members of the zygentoma are not only flat, but also tend to have circi that are roughly the same length as the appendix dorsalis. All of the remaining insects fall into a clade called pterygoda, in reference to their defining feature, wings. Obviously, not all insects have wings. Like all arthropods, insects grow by molting the cuticle, a process called ecdysis, something that they share with their close relatives like velvet worms, tardigrades, and nematodes in the clade Ecdysozoa. Unlike the insects that we have discussed so far, winged insects tend to cease molting once they reach adulthood, and thus pass through a specific number of molts during their lifetimes, with the stages between molts called instars. And generally, they only possess functional wings following their final terminal molt, an adult stage called an imago. The winged insects are themselves divided into two clades, the Paleoptera and the Neoptera, the ancient wings and the new wings. Truth is that both groups have highly evolved wings, and some of the best flying insects in the world do so with ancient wings, like the nearly 6,000 species of dragonflies and damselflies in the order Odonata. We could make entire videos just about how they fly and how their wings have changed over the last few 100 million years. And that's not even including how their eyes function, which is absolutely bonkers. As juveniles, odonates are fully aquatic, but they are terrifying underwater predators. And speaking of butts, dragonfly larvae use their anuses to fire water and provide them with jet propulsion. No big deal. It's a really convenient side effect of the fact that they draw water in and out of their anus to ventilate their internal gills. Damselflies, on the other hand, have external gills and can't do butt propulsion. But they can use the gills for propulsion, a bit like the caudal fin of, some sort of a waterfish. By the way, if anyone can explain to me how gills work in insects like these, given that most insects do not transport oxygen in their hemolymph, I would greatly appreciate the explanation. I'm starting to ask questions that are difficult to Google, so thank you for your help. But adult odonates can be identified by their 4 large flight wings and round heads with small antennae. Dragonflies tend to be heavier bodied with wings that do not fold over the body, whereas damselflies are the opposite of that. Their closest relatives are the more than 3,000 species of mayflies of the order Ephemeroptera, which is an absolutely savage name if you ask me. I mean, it means wings that last for a short time. And I get that. Their imago stage is often notoriously short. But they are an oddball in that the imago stage is not the only stage at which they have functional wings. They also commonly have wings in the instar before the imago, called the subimago. So they sort of have wings for a long time. You can generally identify a subimago by the fact that the wings are cloudy instead of clear. And imago and subimago mayflies can be identified by the way that they hold their wings, a bit like butterflies, up over the body, pointed to the sky. But other than the wings, they really look a lot like silverfish or bristletails, especially as juveniles. Though they are aquatic as juveniles, with up to 7 pairs of gills on the sides of the abdomen, and wing buds on later instars. All of the remaining insects fall into the new winged group, which contains 2 big clades. And I really mean big. Huge clades. The polyneoptera and the eumetabula. And I cannot tell you which of these clades contains the cooler insects. So I'll just start with the smaller of the 2 enormous clades and make my way to the most successful clade of animals on the planet. So, the polyneoptera. The many new wings. I don't get the name. They don't have any more wings than most of the other winged insects, but whatever. Of the many new winged insects, the 2 orders most distantly related to the rest are the orders Zoraptera and Dermaptera. And of the 2, the one you are least likely to have ever seen in your life are the 37 species of Zorapterans, often called angel insects, a name which somewhat escapes me. Other than the fact that they tend to be white and many can shed their wings like the angels in the movie Dogma. Of course, Zooptera isn't much better. It means pure wingless. And obviously some of them have wings, though not all species. And again, many can shed them. What they really look like are not angels, well, unless you think termites look like angels, in which case they totally look like angels. They even tend to live in colonies. The easiest way to identify them is by their antennae, which are long and have 9 very conspicuous segments. And while they tend to live on wood and under bark, they cannot chew through wood like their, well, distantly related angelic cousins. So their closest relatives are not termites. Their closest relatives are the roughly 2,000 species of earwigs, or as I called them growing up, pincher bugs, though they're not true bugs. Of course, they don't tend to crawl into your ears or wear wigs, so what's in a name? A dermapteran by any other name would smell as sweet. Now, interestingly, the aptera in dermaptera does not mean no wings. They are dermatera, skin wings. And rather shockingly, they do have wings. Big wings that are shaped rather like a human ear. And that is the actual source of the common name. Wig relating to beetle, which they're not. But like beetles, they hide their long hind wings under shorter, in this case crazy short, protective forewings, which in the case of earwigs are leathery, skin-like if you will, and are called tegmina, which is the typical term for leathery forewings that cover the hind wings. In beetles, they're more sclerotized and hard and are called elytra. And I would argue that the hind wings of earwigs are among the most angelic in appearance of all insect wings. Of course, their circi are some of the more satanic looking of all abdominal appendages, so that probably cost them the name angel insects. In general, you can probably recognize an earwig. But some are wingless and eyeless, and their circi are much less pinchy, like the 2 families of ectoparasites of small mammals in Africa and Asia. When you have 2,000 species of something, it's bound to be a few oddballs. The next most distantly related order within the polyneoptera are the nearly 4,000 species of stoneflies in the order Plecoptera. That's right, there is almost a stonefly for every species of mammal, and yet most people have never even heard of them. Like mayflies, dragonflies, and damselflies, but unlike their closer relatives that we've just discussed, stoneflies begin their lives in the aquatic environment. That said, they look almost identical to adults, just without wings, which are also absent on the fully aquatic species of stoneflies, even as adults. So some never leave the water, and really none of them are great flyers. So putting fly in their name was a bit unwarranted. It's a bit like calling the galliform birds dinoflies. I mean, yeah, most of them can fly, but they're not great at it. In general, stoneflies are fairly unremarkable as insects. They have 2 circi and their wings fold over their bodies, if they have wings at all. And that pretty much sets them apart from everything else we've discussed. After the stoneflies, angel insects, and earwigs, the next most distantly related order of polyneopteran insects are the order Orthoptera. An order that you may not know by name, but that you almost certainly know, as it contains almost 24,000 species of crickets, grasshoppers, and katydids. And if there's one thing that sets them apart from all other insects, it's those big jumping legs, including this little gem that we found in the Amazon rainforest. Not to mention these. And I want to mention that our entire trip to the Amazon and all of the videos that came from it were all made possible by our supporters at Patreon. And I can tell you that on all future trips, I am going to focus much more heavily on arthropod content. So if you would like to see that happen sooner than later, please consider supporting us on Patreon. And that gets us to the large clade within the Polyneoptera, which contains the remaining 6 orders. This clade itself is divided into 2 main clades. One with 2 orders and the other with 4. And since I love mantises, I'll start with the smaller clade. It contains mantises! Though I will say that the larger clade also contains some rad insects, and a few groups that you've probably never seen in your life. Now I would say that you can easily distinguish the roughly 2,400 species of mantises in the order Mantodia from anything else by their pivoting triangular heads and raptorial arms. But that actually wouldn't be enough. So I'll add that their forewings, when they have them, are generally leathery tegmina. And their antennae tend to be long and thin. If you look at this thing, whatever it is, it has forewings that are clear, like the hind wings, and the antennae are thicker, more like those of a yellow jacket. But this thing, whatever it is, it's not a close relative of mantises. In fact, the closest living relatives of mantises are these. The more than 7,000 species of cockroaches, including termites, in the order Gladiators. And yes, I did just say that termites are cockroaches. Because they are. By the way, don't hesitate to request videos diving deeper into any of these orders. I could talk about nothing but insects for the next 6 years and enjoy the heck out of it. 1 year of videos for each walking leg. Seems appropriate. But termites, as it turns out, are just a clade of eusocial wood-eating cockroaches. Which I don't think really helps or hinders the brands of cockroaches or termites. People tend to not like either of them for different reasons. But I love both of them. Though it helps that I live in the desert where they neither live uninvited in my house nor do they attempt to eat it. And though termites are cockroaches, when it comes to morphological identification, I'll talk about them separately. Non-termite cockroaches are generally dark brownish in color. They tend to be dorsoventrally flattened with an overall oval shape with a pair of cerci coming from near the end of the abdomen. The first segment of the thorax is covered with a shield-like pronotum that covers part of the head as well, obscuring the head to some degree when viewing them from above. From below, you can see a head that looks considerably like that of their closest living relatives, mantises. Their first pair of wings tend to be leathery, like with mantises, and cover the second pair when they're folded over the body. Though, like mantises, not all species possess wings. Termites, on the other hand, tend to be white and super colonial, with different castes like workers, soldiers, and because they're eusocial, kings and queens. Most are wingless, though reproductive castes often have wings for a period of their lives. They look a lot like angel insects, but with far more segments to their antennae than 9, and the ability to chew through wood, and...
They're 5 times our size, and they shoot acid from their foreheads.
Well, if they're termites of the subfamily Termitinae, and you're 1/5 the size of one of their soldiers. They shoot that acid out of something called a fontaneller gun. So I understand if you want us to dig in deeper to the termites in the future. But there is still one more clade in the polyneoptera that we have to discuss right now because it contains some awesome insects and some that will almost certainly be new to you. In fact, of the 4 remaining orders, I will be impressed if you know more than one. This one. The over 3,000 species of walking sticks and leaf insects in the order Phasmatodea. Now, I love pretty much all insects, but these have to be some of the most broadly appreciated of all insects. Right up there with butterflies and ladybugs, which also aren't bugs, but they are broadly loved. How could anyone not love a stick insect? The only reason that I can see is that you don't know about stick insects. They're wonderful. And while many are tiny, some are enormous, reaching lengths over 60 centimeters. That's over 2 feet long. We certainly found some giants in the Amazon. They may or may not have wings, but when they do, the first pair tends to be kind of hardened or leathery and protect the second pair. In general, they look like sticks or leaves, but with legs. Not big hopping hind legs or raptorial grabbing forelegs, as some grasshoppers and mantises are also excellent stick mimics. Those that look like leaves are dorsoventrally flattened, where most other leaf mimic insects are laterally flattened. Their closest relatives are a group that I'll be very impressed if you have ever seen before, though there are almost 500 species. And those would be the web spinners of the order Mayflies. At a glance, they look a bit like rove beetles. But they're not. They're not even close. Though they do have long, flexible bodies and wings that are inconspicuous in most cases. Though some web spinners have long wings. Your big giveaways will be the big, thick Spider-Man web spinners that they have on their forelegs, and the fact that you found them living in a little group in a giant web that they made. The closest relatives of the web spinners and the stick insects are the remaining 2 orders in this clade. The orders Mantophasmatodea and Grilloblatodia, which together only account for about 50 species. And you've probably never seen any of them. But they are the gladiators and ice crawlers. So you know they're cool. There are about 34 species of ice crawlers in the order Grilloblatodia, which should mean something like cricket cockroach. They're neither of these things, but they do look a bit like wingless, pronotumless cockroaches with long circi. Though I think they look more like earwigs of some sort. But the best way to tell if it's an ice crawler is to ask yourself, am I on top of a mountain or at the edge of a glacier? If the answer is no, it's probably not an ice crawler. If the temperature is above 10 degrees Celsius, it's probably not an ice crawler. But if the answer is yes, you've found a very cool insect indeed. No wings, long circi, very cold, ice crawler. But if you like obscure insect orders with names that are a combination of other insect groups that they are not, then you're also going to love the closest relatives of the cricket cockroaches, the 15 species of mantis walking sticks of the order Mantophasmatodia, better known as gladiators. And they're from Africa, so they're African gladiators, to avoid confusion with the American variety, or the Roman ones.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained?
Really, they look like wingless stick insects. I really don't get the comparison to mantises other than the fact that they're carnivorous. To me, they look more like grasshoppers than mantises. But if you're in Africa, watching something that looks like a wingless little walking stick eat another insect, well, you might be very lucky. To this point, we've been looking entirely at insects with mandible-style biting jaws and incomplete metamorphosis, in that their juveniles, called nymphs, look essentially like wingless adults and do not pass through any sort of a pupal stage. However, the remaining clade of insects, the most successful clade of animals on the planet, the Eumetabula, is where we're going to break free of that mold. Let's put it this way. There are 5 orders in the Eumetabula with at least 4 times as many species as the most speciose order that we've discussed so far. One has more than 15 times as many species. And there are just as many orders in this single clade as in all of the clades that we've discussed so far. And I'm not going to want to rush through that group. So we're going to have to give them their own video. And we'll make a supercut for those of you who aren't a fan of The Offspring. And don't worry, I won't forget to talk more about that greatest clip in all of cinematic history. So let me know if you want to see that sooner than later. And what group should we cover next? As always, like and subscribe, and we hope to see you real soon.
What is it? Species appears to be Camponotus fichinus. One of the family Formicidae. An ant. An ant.
My favorite thing is that it is the most accurate depiction of an academic that I've ever seen. Because they killed this thing, right? And they go, what is it? And he goes, the species appears to be Camponotus rachitis. Like that's going to mean anything to anybody. And then he goes, one of the family Formicidae. Also means nothing. And they're like, uh-huh. And now that he has fully established that he's the smartest one in the room, he goes, an ant. And they go, an ant? They're just there like, uh-huh. Okay. Oh, an ant? A normal human being leads off with, I think it's a giant ant. Because they know that's what they wanted to know. But the academic goes, no, no, no. I'm starting to ask questions that are difficult to Google. So thank you for your help.
I can't believe you don't know the answer.
I know, it's outrageous.
You were a biologist? Come on.
Yeah, what kind of zoologist doesn't know the answer to all animal questions?
Yeah, what the heck?
It is outrageous.